Hi there, I'm Grandmaster Nick Pert, and in my DVD now, I'm hoping to give you a black repertoire against many of your opponent's pet lines. When you play club chess, people tend to come up with their favourite openings, and they aren't always the main lines. And in this DVD, I'm going to look at lots of the side lines that white can play, and lots of the offbeat variations that your opponent might try, and try to give you a repertoire against those. So I'm just going to give you a quick summary now of the lines which are covered in the DVD. So first of all, there's quite a few openings which start with the move 1 d4, and I'm looking at black options against all of white's different openings setups. So for example, after d4 knight f6, I've looked at the Trompowsky variation. Here I'm recommending the move knight e4. I've looked at bishop f4, which is the main line, and I've gone for quite a slightly unusual but quite aggressive move knight c6 here, and there's some theory on this line. I've also looked at the move bishop to h4 here, which I don't consider to be as critical, and given black some options against that move. And I've looked at the move h4, and I'm actually going to recommend h6 against h4, and after bishop f4 trying to get back into knight c6 lines anyway. So they're pretty I think interesting positions that black reaches in these lines, and they're quite double-edged. They're very unexplored, so you're going to avoid a lot of the sharp theory. And it seems to me as though black's holding his own in these lines, so I think it should be a good way for black to fight for the win against an opponent and just get a roughly equal but very complicated position straight out the opening. Now, as well as the Trompowsky, I've also looked at d4, d5, and bishop g5 for players that happen to play 1 d5. And in this variation, I've focused on the move f6, which I think is the strongest move. I looked at some recent work by my own twin brother, Richard Pert, and also Lakdawala, I'm not sure if I pronounced his name correctly, and they've actually advocated these kind of systems from the white point of view. I don't think they really managed to find much advantage for white, and actually in most of the lines I seem to find that black is actually doing very well, and I think black's got a good chance of getting the advantage. So I've gone into a lot of detail on some of these variations, and I really feel that black's doing very well in this system after the move to f6. Now, as well as the lines where white puts the bishop on to g5 early, I've also looked at lines where white's played bishop f4 early on, so d4, knight f6, and then either bishop f4 straight away, a kind of London system, or knight to f3 as well. After knight f3, d5, bishop f4, c5, and looked at lots of the London system, different move orders that white might try, ways they might take on c5 in various positions, what happens when they play with e3 and c3, how to handle that kind of setup. I've also looked at lines where white doesn't play knight f3 but instead plays bishop f4 and maybe tries to play with knight to c3 instead, and setups where they play with e3 and sort of omitted any early knight moves. So I've really sort of tried to cover quite a lot of the different options that white might play with putting an early bishop f4, playing an early bishop f4, and this is actually becoming a bit more popular nowadays. Even at top level it's played occasionally, so you need to have some idea of how to play against this kind of system. Now, as well as bishop f4, I've also had a look at the Tory attack. I actually had a game in the Tory attack in the British Championship myself. So e6, and then where white plays bishop g5, and I try and give a repertoire against this, which I think seems to be quite effective and gives black a good chance of at least getting an equal game, and maybe even getting a slight advantage in some situations. I've looked at various different move orders that white might try in order to get there. After, for example, c5, whether white plays with c3, whether they play with e3, if they try and get e4 in early on, lots of different move orders to be aware of. So I've also tried to sort of break down the possibilities that white could go into in the Tory attack. Another system which I've looked at, again, which is very important for players that play either knight f6 or d5 on the first move, is a Verasov. So d4, knight f6, for example, or d5, knight c3, and then black plays d5 and bishop g5. And this is quite a sort of popular opening. I actually played it once myself against Michael Adams in the British Championships. and I actually got a slightly worse position with white, but managed to scramble a draw. I'm actually considering the line knight d7, which I think looks pretty effective. I'd say overall that black is at least equal in these lines, and in some variations black seems to get the advantage. The other d4 opening I've looked at as well is after d4, d5, lines where white's playing e4, the so-called Black Mardima gambit. Obviously, if you're a French defence player or Caracan player, you might be able to just meet that with e6 or c6. But I've actually looked at the lines where black plays d takes e4 here and accepts the gambit, and tried to give some lines which I think seem to be pretty decent for black. So that's most of the d4 openings, but I didn't stop there. I also decided to look at other first moves that white might play. I guess the most popular is the King's Indian attack. So after knight f3, I'm looking at d5 and now 2g3. And I'm trying to give a system based on playing bishop g4 in this position. I think it's pretty solid. I mean, it seems that black is equalising a lot of the lines. Probably black is, can be slightly better in some positions, but most of the time just getting to an equal game and, getting past your opponent's opening theory and giving you a chance to try and outplay your opponent. I've also had a look at what to do against 1g3. Sometimes players play g3, and that can be a little bit more tricky after d5, bishop g2. I've actually considered the move to e5, just trying to take over control of the centre. I think black seems to be doing okay in these lines, but you have to know a little bit about the different structures that might arise and how to handle these positions. So I've had a look at 1g3. As well as g3, I've also looked at f4, aiming for a kind of maybe like a reverse Dutch or possibly a King's Gambit. And again, I'm looking at a similar idea now of playing d5, and in some positions trying to play bishop g4 if white plays knight f3. It seems as though black's equalising in a lot of these lines and seem to get pretty interesting positions. So I spent some time looking at those lines, which again I think are fine for black. Now, as well as some of these lines, I've looked at some slightly more wacky moves. I've actually had a quick look at 1g4, kind of unusual move, but maybe something that club players might play. And again, a system based on d5, and just playing with c6 and just keeping the bishop blocked out, and then obviously trying to play e5 as well at some point. I think it's quite an effective system for black, and hope to get a slight advantage actually against this g4 move, because white might have some problems in the longer run about where to put their king. If they castle kingside, then the pawn on g4 is maybe a little bit weakening. I've also had a look at 1b4 just to try to not let the queen side miss out. After b4 I'm going to recommend e5, and then after bishop b2 just taking the pawn on b4 and going for rapid development with knight f6 and trying to gain some moves off the white bishop. I think black needs to be quite fast with his development here, because white's got the extra central pawn, so maybe in the long run white has sort of slight advantage in terms of pawn structure. But black has short-term activity, you're already slightly ahead in development, and you can gain more time off this bishop on e5, which is slightly exposed. And if black plays quite actively, then white has to be very careful not to reach a bad position out of the opening. And the final line, which I've actually covered, is b3, which I think is, I think played by some top American players like Nakamura, for example. Just given a solid line for black, which again I think looks pretty decent based on playing 1e5 and sort of backing it up with knight c6. And I think black seems to be equalising in those lines as well. So hopefully there's something in there for everybody. Hopefully you can find a lot of these lines are actually quite useful, and they give black a sort of complete repertoire against a lot of these side lines, and hopefully give you a chance to counter your opponent's sort of pet lines. Especially if you know that a player plays a certain line, then this will give you a way of dealing with their opening. And even if they don't regularly play it, they might surprise you with this kind of line. Even top grandmasters play sort of slightly offbeat lines like this once in a while, just to keep their opponents on their toes. So it's very important to have these lines covered. I think also it teaches you a lot about chess as well, because you have to try and understand different positions. So hopefully it's good for your overall play and your general understanding of chess. And yeah, should hopefully be a fun DVD which you can learn a lot from and give you some good ideas to use on the chessboard.